think you need to talk about the finances. I think you need to talk about, how the rent is paid. All the things that you would talk about with the roommate that you're not sleeping with, you should talk about with the roommate that you are sleeping with. How the rent is paid, how the chores are done, all those things need to happen in advance because it gets awkward when they're already there and you're having that conversation. Cat interference. Very pragmatically, I made sure that wherever we moved, I could afford the rent on my own without him. So even though we were splitting the rent when we lived there, if something had happened and he had to move out or I had to move out, I would not be in the situation where I couldn't afford my house anymore because I didn't have my gentleman friend living with me anymore. Don't be like, ooh, now we have two incomes contributing. Let's buy this giant apartment with all the fancy things. Get a little apartment for a year, see how it works.
I've known far too many couples where they've had the experience combine their incomes to afford a nicer place than either one could afford on their own, and then they try to break up and they're screwed. So they have to go to a parent for help or whatever. Especially in areas where the income for standard of living versus the cost of housing for standard of living is very disparate, like in Washington, D.C., like in New York City, like in Los Angeles. In these places, it's really tempting to take advantage of the fact that someone else can chip in a little bit of money and that you don't have to live in a shithole. But rather than do that, maybe live somewhere that's not quite as convenient, like in the suburbs of DC or in New Jersey instead of New York City. But someplace that's not in the midst of the hubbub where it's going to be the most expensive area. I would say to take the stages, just like Brooke suggested, going with a small place first. You can also go with small leases first before you go to a long-term lease, before you go to owning property together.
Yeah, I've been together with my husband in various forms for probably about 10 years now, between being married and not being married. I still am in a house that I can afford without him. I mean, not that I think anything's going to happen, and we both still love each other dearly and we get along, but
he's safe.
It makes me feel better to know that I can afford to live on my own if I have to. When we bought this, we have a townhouse now. When we bought this, one of my requirements when we were shopping for it is that we both need to be able to afford to live here without each other. We weren't married, but we were buying a place together, so we were kind of in that mind frame. But still, statistically speaking, and I'm a very pragmatic person, you never know what's going to happen. And I'd also think if in 3 months your lease is coming up and you're thinking about that, but keep the lease going, but live with each other for a month and see how that goes. Keep an empty apartment, just paying for it, letting the lease run out, and if you're doing together in a month of living together with 2 apartments available to you, then maybe let the other one go.
Whatever the month rent is for that place, I guarantee you is less expensive than a horrible breakup after sharing a residence together. There's got to be situations where you either have to live together or the relationship just isn't going to work. For example, if you live in a completely different state, but you want to keep having a relationship together, you might need to live together in order to make that work. And that's fine. And maybe the only place to be able to find that works out for both of you is a place that you can only afford if both of your incomes contribute to the rent. And that's fine too if you're forced in that position. But think of all those things that are building up. Think of all those conditionals that are building up, forcing you to be kind of trapped, basically. And if that's going to be the case, realize that you need to have an escape plan. You need to have an out clause. Whether that is, checking with your parents and saying, hey, if this doesn't work out with such and such person, can I come live with you until I get back on my feet? Or checking with friends to see if, hey, if this doesn't work out, can I get a room with you guys until I can have this work out?
And even having the conversation with the person that you are potentially moving in together, saying, hey, this doesn't work out, who gets the place?
Yes.
I think it's smart when you're taking such a big step to plan for the worst and hope for the best. I think that makes it easier to live with each other to some degree because you know that you're not there because you have to be, you're there because you want to be.
It doesn't sound romantic because we've been convinced by TV shows and movies and rom-coms that it should all just be easy as pie and you should just fall into it and things just work out. But that's all crap.
And all those little things that didn't bother you before because they left are there now all the time.
It's true.
And you have to be able to work that out.
Our little guest stars, the cats wandering back and forth, brings up a nice little tangential point that I'll make, which is, as you're thinking about living together, think about who and what else would live with you. Some people can't afford to live together without another person contributing. If there's another person living in the same house or apartment with you guys, is that going to hurt your relationship? How is it going to affect the relationship? If you're going to have pets, or if you want to have kids, then how is that going to affect your living together? You may be going into this cohabitation without having had shared pets, without having had a child together. What do you do if, in that scenario, if you break up? Who keeps the animals and or babies? Do people have that conversation? I don't actually know if people talk about who gets the child.
I don't know if it happens with babies. Trey and I have definitely talked about the division of the cats.
Oh,
like,
that's good.
Who gets which cats? Because I get the boy cat, he gets the girl cat. Our girl cat, who is not a period, you'll have noticed because she hates me. So he gets her because she can't live with me.
What about each person's credit rating?
You have to be careful there's not a blame situation there when you're going into buying something together that, oh, we could get this house, but too bad you suck because you didn't pay your credit cards off, so I guess we'll get this crappy house instead. So
That'd be great if whatever the disparities are, you don't blame each other for it. But man, if you're even considering living with someone at any point down the road, work on your credit rating.
Yeah.
Because even the most enlightened and open-hearted of people start resenting the problems that build up from one person's bad credit versus another person's good credit, because the person with better credit rating has worked to keep that.
Yeah.
And it's hard to avoid not resenting being kept away from the life that you work towards because of your partner. If one of you has a really great credit history and really great income, maybe the other person can just suck it up and say, hey, I will live off your dime until I am better.
Well, and it's also part of the conversation leading up to moving in together. Whether, if your rent is $1,000, are you going to split it down the middle? If one person in the relationship makes a lot more money than the other, is it going to be like a percentage? And that's a conversation that should happen way before any leases are signed, saying what are we both bringing to the table, both financially and all of that kind of stuff. That should be settled before the moving in happens.
If the only solution that you can come up with is that the person who cannot contribute as much money and who has a worse credit history has to work harder to catch up to the other person,
that's me.
That's me. Yeah, your relationship is doomed. Sorry.
Maybe your situation, you throw everything into a pot and everyone gets to spin it. I mean, that's certainly how my parents, and I think a lot of people of my parents' generation did it. My dad is the breadwinner and my mom gets to spend the money, and they're both okay with that. And so if you're okay with that, more power to you.
These days, it is so relevant to consider dual income situations in a relationship versus single income situations. Perhaps one of you is planning on staying at home and being the homemaker. In that situation, you're divvying up not just the income, because then it becomes one income, but also the responsibility, and feel good about how that's apportioned out. Take out all those stupid little details early on, as early as you possibly can, so they don't come back to bite you in the ass later on. If you tackle the hard little things early on, they don't hurt either one of your feelings as much as if you let it build up for months and months and deal with it once there's an explosion. The explosions are harder to clean up than little conversations.
And I feel like if you've established at the beginning that, X person is the person that takes care of the trash, if they're not taking care of the trash, hold on, cat in my lip. If they're not taking care of the trash, it's much easier to bring it up. Because,
oh my God.
Yeah.
Do not fall into a college roommate situation with the person that you're dating. That is awful. Have some face-to-face conversations with the people that you allegedly like. Make sure that everybody agrees about what's happening. And if there's resentment there, I mean, that, again, this is indicative of how the rest of your life is going to go if you're living together. If you resent just talking about who takes care of getting the groceries, who cooks on Friday nights, if you resent talking about that and then coming to decisions and then sticking with those decisions, then you are not in the right mindset to live with someone. What about a scenario where you and your partner are coming from situations where you had lots of stuff and your shared environment isn't going to be big enough for all of your stuff combined? I know that some couples will take like storage spaces
I have had friends who, like, that became a big problem as to whose couch they kept, who got bookshelf space, and how did they integrate their books into one large book collection, or did they keep them separate? And
I would have such a hard time combining my books with somebody else.
I would too.
I mean, screw living together, screw marriage. Sharing book collections? That's hard.
We've been together 10 years and we still have separate book collections. So, yeah.
Respect.
I mean, he's allowed to read them. I mean, it's not like he has to check them out or anything, but they're fine.
You have to put them back in the right place.
Oh, yeah.
I understand. I get that.
I mean, that's my career. I'm a librarian by trade, so don't be messing with my books. And you have to be prepared to give things up. If all of your stuff is nicer and all of their stuff is kind of thrift store crap, maybe that's an easy decision. But what if they're really attached to their thrift store crap?
Maybe they're Macklemore. They don't want to give it up.
Yeah. Maybe, each person gets to bring in their most favoritist piece of furniture, and you work around that.
Big stuff that's disgusting is really, really hard to accept in one's life.
Well, maybe not disgusting things, but what if it was just really ugly? What if it was just...
Yeah, I don't really distinguish between those two very much.
If you are the person who is already established, be sensitive as to what the other person wants to bring.
Oh, yeah. If the cohabitation is going to go from one person living in a place to two people living in that same place, you better be willing to let some stuff in.
Yeah.
The person that you're planning on living with comes with stuff. Their baggage is not just emotional, it's also physical. If you're unwilling to let in their stuff, then why are you even asking this question? That doesn't make any sense at all. It's difficult to make that space when you're on a limited budget, but I think even in that scenario where you have a smaller place, a smaller apartment, whatever, I think it's a good idea to try and make like at least a corner of the place designated for a particular person. This is going to be your corner. You can put whatever you want on the shelf. You can put whatever dresser or chair or whatever you want in that corner. And I'm not going to say a damn thing about it. Really respect that space. I think if you can do that, then that sort of compromise will really help make the cohabitation an easier prospect, a more successful prospect.
Yeah. And also, I mean, just finding out what is important to each person. In my relationship, my husband really didn't care necessarily what color the walls are or what kind of couch we had, but he cared about what kind of TV we had, and he cared about, our setup as for our electronics, and so we kind of...
Jeez, Brooke, can you be more stereotypical?
I know. But, he also had veto power. So I was like, okay, I love this fluorescent orange color. I'm going to paint our living room orange. He'd be like, no. Laying the veto down, pick something else. So if it was something that the other person absolutely hated, there was always that veto power. But if one person doesn't particularly care about certain aspects of the shared living space, give up that control in order to get control over what you do care about.
A great way to respond to a scenario where one partner cares about some aspect of living together and the other person doesn't, ask that partner, well, then what is important to you? What does concern you? That way, you will know that hopefully he cares about some aspect of living with you. Don't feel like your partner has to contribute to every aspect of living together, or that if they don't, that's somehow a bad sign. Not in the slightest. It just means that different people have different priorities and different things that are important to them living together. I like to have a pretty spacious bathroom, but I have dated women who don't care. They literally just want a mirror and a sink, and that's all that they want. That's our mutual important. That's our mutual priorities. It's important to find those out and then respect them, and don't go around questioning them and looking for hidden ulterior motives behind what's important to each partner. When you're dealing with your partner, they want your opinion on whatever. It doesn't matter how inane and trivial and unimportant it is to you. A horrible response to any question about your opinion, your feelings, is that you don't care. It's far better for you to say, that thing doesn't matter as much to me as this thing, so I'm going to give you my opinion about this thing instead to show you that I care. And you can make your decision about that, and we'll be happy together with those different contributions to our living scenario.
Or you can even be like, well, I don't really have an opinion on that, but tell me about your opinion.
Yes.
Like, I don't have an opinion on those 2 shades of red, but tell me what you think are the merits of each. And that way, again, you honestly don't care which shade of red the wall is, but you're still engaging with the other person and showing that you are interested in their process, I guess, which you should be if you are together.
Once you've had all those horrible conversations about what do we do if we break up and have to move away, or what if we do if all of a sudden my income stops? If you have all those difficult conversations and you're able to do it maturely and not resent the other person, and you still want to live together after all of that, then the romance can happen because you're not stressed about that anymore. You can be romantic because you're not worried about, well, should I make this big romantic gesture that takes a lot of effort, time, and money on my part? But what if she moves out next week? If you've already had all the tough conversations, you're not going to have that much of a fear about what's going to happen down the road because you'll already have talked about what's coming down the road. You are freed up to be more invested in your romance. Hopefully, if you talk about all these possibilities and what you would do if things don't work out, that'll actually make it more likely that things will work out. Anything else? Any other aspects of this?
So I think we covered all the living together